Hotep, everybody. Hey, how's everybody doing? Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. It is Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. And African American History Month is almost over. Black History Month is almost over. And I've been very busy doing lectures all over the place, all over Detroit, Metro Detroit, Inkster, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit. And it's been my busiest February, okay? So I wanted to talk some about African American History Month, what used to be called Black History Month. And I wanted to talk specifically about this year's theme for African American History Month. There's an annual theme, okay, that comes from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And this is the organization that Dr. Carla G Woodson co-founded September 9th, 1915, okay, in Chicago. So everywhere I spoke at this year, and I spoke at a lot of African American churches also, but everywhere I spoke at this year, nobody knew what this year's theme was. And most people don't know there's an annual theme for African American History Month, which makes the this monthly cultural celebration and makes it relevant, okay? So this year's theme is dealing with Black migrations, okay? So we'll talk some about that. Hey, everybody, share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. And I'm sharing it right now. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. You're going to learn a whole lot from this broadcast because, unfortunately, many of our people celebrate African American History Month, or what used to be called Black History Month, but most of our people don't know the origins of it, okay? And as I explained in a lot of my presentations, we don't have to keep recycling the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year, all right? Because, and then wonder why many of our children are not interested in that, okay? All right, so once again, I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. And if we look at this year's theme, which is Black migrations, okay? And if we look at the website is asalh.org, asalh.org, okay? asalh.org is the official website of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which used to be the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. So this year's theme, Black migrations. And we know that August 20th of this year is the 400th year anniversary of that slave ship of 20 some odd Africans coming into Jamestown, Virginia, August 20th, 1619, okay? So even though that did happen, African people, we've been in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. We've been here for tens of thousands of years. So people should read this book here, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, by Dr. David Imhotep, which deals with the African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago. These were the Khoisan, who are the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. They come from Southern Africa. They go all around the world. And they're here also, okay? And there's a big discovery in 2004 by Dr. Albert Goodyear, who's an archaeologist at the University of South Carolina. And they discovered an African presence in this country going back at least 51,700 years ago, okay? And that's a migration right there. Those Africans came over here by boat. So read this book, Dr. David Imhotep. His new book comes out at the end of this, probably in the next week or so, anytime now. The First Americans Were Africans Revisited. And it has about 200 additional pages, more research, okay? But so African people are the original Americans, and there's overwhelming evidence to prove this. The African people are the original Americans. This does not mean the transatlantic slave trade did not happen. What this means is that when we deal with our history, we have to deal with at least the last 50,000 years of history. And we have to understand migrations of African people voluntary migrations and forced migrations like the transatlantic slave trade. We must understand this, look at this chronologically as opposed to episodically, okay? All right, so if we look at this year's theme for African American History Month, a solid 2019 theme, Black Migrations, emphasizes the movement of people of African descent to new destinations and subsequently to new social realities, to new destinations and subsequently to new social realities. While inclusive of earlier centuries, this theme focuses especially on the 20th century through today. So you're largely looking at the Great Migration of 1915 to about 1970, okay? Beginning in the early decades of the 20th century, African-American migration patterns included relocation from southern farms to southern cities, from the South to the Northeast, Midwest, and West, from the Caribbean to the U.S. Cities, as well as to migrant labor farms. Remember, Marcus Garvey immigrates to the U.S. in 1916 from Jamaica, okay? And the immigration of noted African Americans to Africa and to European cities, such as Paris and London, after the end of World War I and World War II. Such migrations resulted in a more diverse and stratified interracial and intra-racial urban population amid a changing social milieu, such as the rise of the Garvey movement in New York, Detroit, and New Orleans. Okay, that's going to be in the late 19-teens and going into the 1920s. The emergence of the Black industrial workers and Black entrepreneurs, the growing number and variety of urban churches and new religions, new music forms like ragtime, Scott Joplin and ragtime, blues and jazz. And then we have blues gives way to rhythm and blues, which gives way to rock and roll. Rock and roll was a old slang term for sex, right? And we talk about rhythm and blues, rock and roll, we talk about Fats Domino, Little Richard, Big Mama Thornton, who originally recorded Hound Dog before Elvis Presley recorded Hound Dog. You know, we talk about a lot of these early groups, and then that gives way to the Motown sound, which totally changes the world. People will listen to Motown music all around the world. Yeah, I mean, the Motown sound inspired the Beatles, inspired the Rolling Stones, it inspired groups, you know, like the Who and things like this. Okay, so the Motown sound coming out of Detroit, the Motor City, totally changes the world. Then also we have to deal with things like Soul Train, the impact that Soul Train, Don Cornelius, right now they have the 10-part series American Soul airing on BET, but Soul Train helps to totally change the world and to put forth an image of African Americans that we wanted to put forth, right? Owned by an African American man. And then you have commercials like from Afro Sheen. You have commercials from African American owned companies also. So Soul Train is a cultural icon. It's a cultural icon, but it's also a lesson in entrepreneurship as well. So we have new music forms like ragtime and blues and jazz, white backlash, as in the Red Summer of 1919. The Red Summer is the year after World War I ends, and you have over 25 major race riots in this country. It's called the Red Summer. The blossoming of visual and literary arts, as in New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Paris in the 1910s and 1920s. That's called the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, the Harlem Renaissance has a big impact on this country. And this is going on during the Great Migration, okay? And you have, you know, Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and, you know, the Cotton Club and things like this. You have this literary and art movement, music movement, Louis Armstrong, etc., during the Harlem Renaissance. Now, the theme Black migrations equally lends itself to the exploration of the centuries, later decades from spatial and social perspectives, with attention to new African American, with the attention to new African Americans because of the burgeoning African and Caribbean population in the U.S. Northern African Americans returned to the South because of gentrification up north. Many of us are going back down south right now. Racial suburbanization, inner city hyper ghettoization, health and environment, civil rights and protest activism, electoral politics, mass incarceration, and dynamic cultural production. So we're going to see all this largely take place during the Great Migration, where you have about 1915 to 1970, you have over 6 million African Americans migrating from the South up north and out west. And this is going to totally change the country. And it's during the Great Migration that at the beginning of it, we're going to see the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, founded by Dr. Carla G Woodson. We're going to see Negro History Week first celebrated in the second week of February in 1926. We're going to see it transform into Black History Month in 1976, a few years after the Great Migration ends. Okay. So if we look very briefly at this, how's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. If you like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. And African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network as well on the audio podcast of our broadcast. Okay. All right. So if we look at Dr. Carla G Woodson, because unfortunately, when I speak at many African American History Month events, people are there, they celebrate every year. Number one, they don't know there's an annual theme. Two, they never heard of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Three, they really don't know anything about Dr. Carla G Woodson. All right. So Dr. Carla G Woodson was born December 19th, 1875 in New Canton, Virginia. Okay, so he was born 10 years after slavery ended. So chattel slavery ends December 1865 with the 13th Amendment. The Civil War ends June 2nd, 1865. Okay, so he's largely educated by his mother, who was literate. He's born to former slaves. Okay, and his father is a farmer. They live on a farm. His mother's literate, so she teaches him at home. He doesn't go to formal school until about the age of 19. And when he goes to formal schooling, they realize he's very, very intelligent. He does about 4 years of schoolwork in 2 years. He's going to go on to get an undergraduate degree from Berea College in Kentucky in 1853. In 1903. It was founded, Berea College was founded in 1853. And he goes on to get another undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago in 1907, and a master's degree from the University of Chicago in 1907 also. Now, he's an educator. He's going to teach in high schools, high school in Washington, D.C. I think it was Frederick Douglass High School. He's going to go on also to teach at Howard University as well. He gets a PhD in American history from Harvard University in 1912. Okay, so this is a brilliant brother, and he understands that our people don't know their history. Okay, and what takes place is 1915 is a pivotal year, very, very important year in the history of this country. Number one, you have the Great Migration, the beginning of the Great Migration in 1915. Okay, and that starts during the second year of World War I. So World War I is 1914 to 1918. U.S. gets involved in World War I in 1917. And in 1915 is also the 50th year anniversary of the Civil War ending, the 13th Amendment, which legally freed enslaved Africans from chattel slavery, but also 1915 is the 50th year anniversary of the Ku Klux Klan being founded. It was founded December 24th, 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. Okay, later in the same month that chattel slavery ends. All right. So what takes place is that in Chicago in 1915 there was a 3-week symposium that commemorated the 50th year anniversary of chattel slavery ending, and it chronicled the accomplishments and achievements of African Americans in this 50-year period of time. They have symposiums, they have exhibits, they have lectures, things like this, right? So it's at this 3-week symposium that Dr. Carla G Woodson gets the idea to create an organization dedicated to the scientific study, preservation, research of African American history, our accomplishments and achievements, but not just on this country, but not just in this country, but also on the continent of Africa as well. So September 9th, 1915, he and 4 friends found the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And so this was the first organization basically of this type. 1916, he creates the Journal of Negro History, the Journal of Negro History. And the Journal of Negro History was a historical journal that he created for African American historians to publish our own historical papers, because a lot of the white historical journals did not want to publish our papers, number one. Number two, they didn't want to deal with a lot of the topics that we wanted to deal with. So he understood that we had to be able to tell our own story, okay? And we had to have those platforms where we could tell our own stories. And then in 1921, he creates Associated Publishers, Inc. And this was a publishing company that he created that published his books. His most famous book is The Miseducation of the Negro, which came out in 1933. But also it was publishing textbooks for HBCUs, publishing textbooks for our schools also. So, I mean, this is a brilliant brother. This is a brother who was ahead of his time. Personally, I think he was ahead of his time. Okay, so we have the Great Migration taking place starting in 1915 during World War I. And what's happening is that during World War I, you have about 5 million men who go fight in World War I. Most of them white, 370,000 of them African Americans. And when these men go fight in World War I, they leave jobs behind, okay? They have jobs. When they come back, those jobs are being filled largely by African Americans, especially migrating from the South up north, going into the factories, going to Detroit, Michigan, Gary, Indiana, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois. And then also immigrants coming to this country are getting a lot of these jobs. So when these white men come back, they don't have jobs. The Ku Klux Klan has been rejuvenated because of the movie The Birth of a Nation that came out February 8th, 1915. And that movie calls Race Riots in the Streets. This is during World War II. Okay, I'm sorry, just during World War I. This movie calls Race Riots in the Streets. This movie glorifies the Ku Klux Klan and rejuvenates the Ku Klux Klan. This is the original Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffith, David Wark Griffith. Okay, and the movie The Birth of a Nation is based upon a novel called The Klansman by a man named Thomas Dixon. The first month that this movie is out, the movie was called The Klansman. Okay, and then the movie was changed to The Birth of a Nation. And this movie depicted black men trying to rape white virgins. Most of the significant characters of African Americans were white people in blackface. And African Americans were going to protest against this movie, okay? Because we knew it was detrimental to us. I mean, you have rampant lynchings taking place at this time in this country. And this movie glorifies the Ku Klux Klan. And this movie basically rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan, which had largely died out by 1915, because a lot of the early members of the Ku Klux Klan, you know, these were a lot of former Confederate soldiers. So a lot of them were dead. So this movie, at the end of the movie, it shows the Ku Klux Klan rising up to put down a rebellion of former Union Negro soldiers, because the movie takes place during the Civil War. I'm saying during slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. During slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction, and it takes place in Piedmont, South Carolina, and it shows the slave master. His name is Dr. Cameron. It shows he and his family. They have slaves on the plantation, and it shows that everything is fine and they love their slaves. The slaves love their masters. There's a scene where it shows the enslaved Africans dancing and singing and performing for the slave master and his family, right? Then the Civil War comes through and destroys the South. Then you have the Reconstruction era, basically 1865 to 1877. And it shows Union Negro soldiers coming in and taking over the town and pushing white people around, oppressing white people, things like this, right? And then at the end, it shows the Ku Klux Klan rising up to put down this rebellion of former Union Negro soldiers, and it says this is the birth of a nation. So the movie calls Race Riots in the Streets. They did a private screening for President Woodrow Wilson at the White House showing this movie. But we knew how detrimental this movie was to our existence, right? So we're going to organize protests against this film, okay? Now, this is the same year that Dr. Carla G Woodson co-founds the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. This movie comes out at the beginning of the year. It debuts February 8th, 1915. And I talk about all this in a lot of my African American History Month presentations I've done this year, and tie this into the theme of Black migrations, because this is right at the beginning of the Great Migration. Now, there's an article from theroot.com from March 1st, 2015, which was the 100th year anniversary of the movie The Birth of a Nation. And it's called How Black America Rallied to Stop the Racist Film Birth of a Nation. How Black America Rallied to Stop the Racist Film Birth of a Nation, okay? And in this article, it talks about how Charlotta Bass was the editor of the West Coast oldest Black newspaper. It was called the California Eagle. And Charlotta Bass had sounded the alarm some days before in a telegram to NAACP headquarters, warning about a hideous film that was wowing white film goers in Los Angeles, California, despite efforts to have this movie banned. Leaders of the 6-year-old New York-based organization called the NAACP, because they were founded in 1909, so they're 6 years old at this time. You know, of the 57 founders, only 7 were African Americans. It's really the first interracial civil rights organization, and they were largely formed to combat against lynchings, the rampant lynchings that were taking place in this country. Okay, so you have Dr. W.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, others are co-founders of the NAACP, as well as William Monroe Trotter also. Okay, so through lobbying, leaders of the 6-year-old New York-based organization, led mainly by white philanthropists, sprang into action. Through lobbying, letter writing, and litigation, they spearheaded a campaign that for most of the rest of the year saw them and their allies in the Black press trying to outrun the publicity juggernaut that turned The Birth of a Nation into the talk of the nation. Okay, this was a huge film. The film is on YouTube, so you can watch it. It's a 3-hour movie. It's a silent movie, so it has the titles, right? Just the captions. So be prepared. And this movie also revolutionized movie making at the time also. The type of shots and scenes that it shot was revolutionary. It was the longest movie at that time, 3 hours in length, most expensive movie, $100,000 to make it, okay? And Charlotta Bass and her husband, Joe, had been onto the story for about a decade, since Thomas Dixon's novel, The Klansman, had become a play that eventually became the movie, The Birth of a Nation. Now, when the play is running in Philadelphia in 1906, the Klansman, you had 3,000 African Americans who protested, okay? If you read Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., this is the 6th edition, a beat up copy of it. Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., in the back of the book, he has a chronology of history, and it's called Milestones in History, okay? Milestones in History. Return to it here. Yeah, landmarks and milestones. So he has a chronology of history in the back starting in 1619. So if we turn to 1906, he talks about how October 22nd, 1906, 3,000 blacks demonstrated and rioted in Philadelphia to protest a theatrical presentation of Thomas Dixon's The Klansman. So this is the play. The play preceded the movie, okay? So it was a novel first, then a play, then a movie. We had enough sense to know that the play was detrimental to our existence, because you're talking about at a time when you have rampant lynchings in this country, nobody being arrested for the lynchings, nobody being held responsible. They're taking pictures of the people, white people at the lynchings, smiling, pointing at the dead body of an African American or more than one, and making postcards out of it, okay? So we knew that this movie encouraged things like this, right? So, okay, so we protested against it. Now, what I find very interesting is that today, the same NAACP will give image awards to the TV show Empire, which is really like The Birth of a Nation of today, because the TV show Empire shows a lot of negative, stereotypical images of African Americans. And even worse than that is on the Fox TV network, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch also owns the Fox News network, okay, which is very right wing, attacks African Americans basically on a daily basis, and is a big ally to Donald John Trump. Okay, and this is the network. So Empire is on the Fox TV network, which is broadcast TV, free TV. That's owned by Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch also owns the Wall Street Journal, by the way, which is a right-wing publication also. But Rupert Murdoch also owns the Fox News network that has Sean Hannity. It had Bill O'Reilly before he got fired. It has, Geraldo Rivera, Laura Ingraham, all these right-wing conservatives. Okay, they're on that network as well. Okay, so the NAACP used to protest negative images like that of us in the media. Today, they're giving image awards to the TV show Empire, which is like The Birth of a Nation of today. I mean, this is many people don't make the connection and look at it like that. All right, but it's very disturbing. So you're going to have us protesting against this, right? Now, when it goes to Boston, you're going to have William Monroe Trotter lead protests against it also in Boston. Now, AtlantaBlackStar.com has an article called "How William Monroe Trotter's Boycott of the Birth of a Nation Laid the Foundation for the Civil Rights Movement." How William Monroe Trotter's boycott of the Birth of a Nation laid the foundation for the Civil Rights Movement. Okay, and that's a really good article to check out also. It's from AtlantaBlackStar.com, a really historical article. Now, it talks about there was a documentary that came out in 2017 called The Birth of a Movement. The Birth of a Movement. Now, some of you saw it. It was on Independent Lands on PBS, Public Broadcasting System. Independent Lands, okay? And this movie dealt with William Monroe Trotter's boycott of the movie The Birth of a Nation. So if we look very quickly here at this article, it says on Saturday evening, April 17th, 1915, the editor of the Boston Guardian, William Monroe Trotter, and a dozen or so mostly black men and women, from the Boston branch of the NAACP walked in lockstep toward the city's Tremont Theater. Okay, the city's Tremont Theater. They had been spurred by the arrival of the first picture show, because that's what they call them back then, a picture show, to be screened inside the White House walls. D.W. Griffith's medium bending film, Birth of a Nation, a movie William Monroe Trotter found vile and detrimental to the sensibilities and progress of Negroes nationwide. William Monroe Trotter and his cohorts were determined to disrupt the viewing of the movie and entered the lobby to buy tickets to the film. Stopping the viewing was part of a 2-month campaign by William Monroe Trotter and other black organizations to have the film censored. Birth of a Nation was adapted by the from the best-selling book, The Klansman. It was lauded by white film critics as a cinematic masterwork, pushing film at the time from a life excursion into an art form with its use of multiple cameras, close-ups, fadeaway shots, and sweeping battle scenes. Before D.W. Griffith, audiences would only see shots of short, funny scenes, loosely connected, if at all. Now, D.W. Griffith envisioned telling stories by editing and weaving them into what would become the first full-length feature film in cinematic history. Okay, so, and what this movie did was it told a revisionist history, okay, dealing with the Civil War and Reconstruction, things like this, okay. And Birth of a Nation tells a revisionist history of the American Civil War by portraying Reconstruction as a world turned upside down, with Southern whites trapped under a brutal, oppressive black yoke after the freed slaves take over state government in the film, okay? Black lawmakers are drunk on moonshine while eating fried chicken, pass pro-miscegenation laws to legally get their hands on white women, etc. Okay, so, I mean, the movie, all the negative stereotypes of African Americans were depicted in this movie, right? So this movie kicks off, this movie's at the beginning of the Great Migration. And it's later in that same year that Dr. Carla G Woodson co-founds the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, okay? How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page, invite your friends to tune in also. And we're dealing some with the history of African American History Month. Dr. Carla G Woodson, who's the founder of it, but we're also dealing with this year's annual theme. There's a theme each year. There's been an annual theme going back to 1928. Most people don't know this. They celebrate Black History Month every year. They don't know who founded it. They don't know that the Association for the Study of African American Life and History is the governing body of African American History Month. They don't know that there's an annual theme each year that makes this monthly cultural celebration relevant. It ties right into what's going on right now. Okay, so when I do my presentations, I've done a number of them this month. I tell people we don't have to keep recycling the same 15 to 20 sanitized Negroes every year, because a lot of the Black History Month celebrations is just boring because people don't know what they're doing and don't understand history. Okay, so they keep bringing out slave history. They'll talk about Frederick Douglass. They'll talk about Harriet Tubman. They'll halfway talk about Dr. King, talk about Malcolm X a little bit. It's personality based, okay? Or they talk about the first Negro to do this, or they'll talk about African Americans who invented things that make white people's lives easier, right? And that is dealing with African ingenuity, that African genius, but we're not dealing with the movements of people. We're not dealing with the unsung heroes. And this is one of the things that Dr. Carla G Woodson wanted to do. He didn't want to just deal with like personalities. He wanted to deal with unsung heroes. He wanted to better understand the circumstances that thrust people into greatness also, okay? And understand movements of African Americans as well, and how this impacted America. So if we continue here, how's everybody doing? We got Dawn. Nope, don't know anything like that in the UK. Okay, Don Smith in the United Kingdom. Okay, we just posted the link there also. We have the 8 DVD bundle pack, the Africans that were here before Columbus, the Africans that were here before Columbus as well. You can order that. We have that on sale right now. It's on sale, limited time, only $50. It includes a double lecture I did with Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. Also one I did with Professor Kaba Kamene, Booker T. Coleman, that deals with the ancient African presence here and in Mexico. One from Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, They Came Before Columbus. Also one from Dr. John Henry Clark, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. So we just posted a link here. It's also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right. So you have World War I going on. You have African Americans getting jobs, working in the factories. You're going to have the Red Summer, when you have these major race riots that take place after these men come back, these white men come back home from World War I. And then the Great Migration continues, and we're moving out of the South. Many of us are being ran out of the South. Some of us are leaving voluntarily. Some of us are being ran out of the South. We're being killed for our land, our farmland. Our families are fleeing for their lives. We're being ran out by white domestic terrorism, whether it's the Ku Klux Klan or a Ku Klux Klan-like group, okay, like the Black Legion or the Knights of the White Camellia, or just white people that don't even have a name of the group, and they're just terrorizing us and running us off our land, and then taking control of our land as well. So from 1865 to 1920, African Americans acquire somewhere around 15 million acres of land. Okay, from 1920 to 1975, we lost 14 million acres of land. We lose a lot of our land going into the Great Depression. If you look at 1930, we owned 925,000 farms approximately. By 1939, it dropped down to about 680,000 farms. All right. And the Great Depression was horrific for us. We lost millions of acres of land during the Great Depression. So all this is taking place during the Great Migration. Now, if we look at 1926, so Dr. Carla G Woodson realizes, he's an educator. He realizes that our people don't understand their history. He realizes the parents don't understand our history, and the children. Now, even though you have Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which started in 1914 in Jamaica, he immigrates to the U.S. in 1916. Garvey is inspired partly by Booker T. Washington. He reads Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and he likes Booker T. Washington's do for self and his emphasis on economic empowerment and also dealing with the skilled trades as well. So Garvey's setting up chapters of the UNIA here in the U.S. And this is the largest mass movement of African Americans in the history of this country. Now, there's dispute over the number of members he had. Some conservative estimates say 1 to 2 million members. Others say between 4 to 6 million members he had in the UNIA. However, even though this was the largest mass movement of our people, and he instilled a sense of pride in us, this is where the Pan-African flag comes from, the red, black, and green. That was adopted at the International Convention of the UNIA, August 13th, 1920. Okay, the Pan-African flag. You see the red, black, and green behind me with the picture of Malcolm. This is where this comes from. Even though this takes place, still, majority of African Americans didn't know their history. And this is why Dr. Carla G Woodson created Negro History Week. Now, it was never designed to be the only time of the year that we study our history. It was a time for us to celebrate our history, our accomplishments and achievements in this country, but also on the continent of Africa. He chose the second week in February, not because it's the shortest month of the year or the coldest month of the year, okay? He chose the second week of February because it contained the birth dates of Abraham Lincoln, February 12th, and the assumed birth date of Frederick Douglass, February 14th, because Frederick Douglass didn't know his birth date. He didn't know the year he was born. It's either 1817 or 1818. And because slaves didn't have birth certificates, right? And Douglass talks about that. And this is, Douglass wrote three autobiographies. This is his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, okay? Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. And Douglass talks about that in here. He talks about, you know, he wrote this book when he's about 27, 28 years old. It's after he escaped to freedom. And he talks about at this time, most slaves that he came in contact with didn't know the exact date of their birth, maybe didn't know the exact year. They would estimate the time of their birth, the year they were born, or the month they were born. They were estimated by agriculture. So it was cotton planting time. It was cherry planting time or cherry picking time, okay? It was estimated based upon what was happening agricultural, regarding agriculture, okay? What crop they were picking, what crop they were planting. They would estimate the birth date based upon that, okay? And he talks about that in his first autobiography. So at this point in time, in the second week of February, the reason why he chose the second week of February, not just because of these two birth dates, Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, but African Americans were already having celebrations during this second week in February, celebrating these two birthdays of these two men. So his new cultural celebration he inserts into the second week of February because celebrations are already taking place. Okay, so he can ride that momentum, and it's easier for him to get the information out. It's easier for people to find out about this. All right. So if we look at this book, this is probably one of the best books you're going to find dealing with the history of Dr. Carla G Woodson. Now, this is written by Dr. Pero Gaglo Dagbovie. Dr. Pero Gaglo Dagbovie. Dagbovie is a history professor at Michigan State University in Michigan. Okay. And it's called Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C., the Father of Black History. Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C., the Father of Black History. Most people never studied Dr. Carla G Woodson. This was a brilliant brother. I'm telling you, this brother is an author, co-founder of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, founded Black History Month. He actually created it in 1925. He sent out a press release in 1925 stating that the second week in February would be Negro History Week. Okay. And this brother was a historian, educator. I mean, this brother was brilliant, very much underrated. But if we look at, and most people who celebrate Black History Month don't know anything about Carla G Woodson. So if we look at page 100 of his book, and on page 101, he has a picture of Frederick Douglass, right? And we know February 20th was the anniversary of Frederick Douglass' death. Okay, there was a big article from the Washington Post on February 20th about this, about Frederick Douglass passing away, and he making amends with Susan B. Anthony, the women's rights activist, the white women's right activist, right before he died. He passed away February 20th, 1895. Well, we look here on page 100, it says, Woodson founded Negro History Week in 1926. He explained the reason behind the celebration in a pamphlet widely distributed months before the first celebration was to take place during the second week in February 1926 in commemoration of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln's birthdays. He exclaimed that blacks knew, quote unquote, practically nothing. Blacks knew, quote unquote, practically nothing about their history. He ultimately believed that African Americans could benefit immensely from knowledge of their past and the accomplishments of their ancestors. He added that race prejudice was the byproduct of whites' beliefs that black people had not contributed anything of worth to world civilization. So basically, you have a lot of white people who operate based upon stereotypes that we have not contributed anything to this society. Okay, what would happen if they actually found out that the original Americans were African people and we were here in this land before Native Americans came into existence, and this was our land stolen from us? What would happen to the psyche of the average African American, the average black person in America, so-called black person? Because black comes from the Old English word black, which means to bleach or to make white. What would happen to the average African American when they found out that this was our land stolen from us, and we were here before Native Americans came into existence, and original and African people are the original Native Americans? I'm not saying the transatlantic slave trade did not happen. Yes, it did. I'm saying we must understand history tens of thousands of years before it happened and understand a chronology of history of at least the last 50,000 years, bare minimum. A chronology of history of at least the last 50,000 years of history, bare minimum, not the last 500 years of history, because they like to start our history oftentimes in 1440, 1441 with the Portuguese getting involved in the transatlantic slave trade, and leave out the previous hundreds of years of history of the Africans known as the Moors in Europe, which lead to the Portuguese and the Spanish get involved in the transatlantic slave trade. It leads to them starting to set sail. The Moors are going to reintroduce the concept of longitude and latitude into Europe. When you look at Columbus setting sail August 3rd, 1492 on the Nina Nepenthe and Santa Maria, Christopher Columbus is using nautical instruments based upon technology that the Moors introduced into Europe, these Africans known as the Moors, who civilized Europe, bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. And a lot of your early universities in Europe, University of Toledo, University of Bologna, things like this, they were created to study the Moorish science texts. They were created to study the teachings that the Moors introduced in Europe. But these teachings that the Moors taken in Europe are coming from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. In Stolen Legacy, George G.M. James talks about how the Moors were the custodians of the ancient Egyptian mystery system. The Moors are taking these teachings from ancient Kemet, from the Nile Valley region of Africa. They're taking them into Europe and teaching them to Europeans. And when they go in, about 85 to 90% of Europeans are illiterate. Okay, you had kings and queens who were illiterate. You had kings and queens who couldn't read and write. So, and the Moors are intermixing into the European population and changing the complexion of a lot of Europeans. This is why they're going in through Morocco, and Spain and Portugal is right above Morocco. Okay, and this is why historically the Spanish and the Portuguese were a darker complexion than the English and the Austrian and Germans, because that's further away. England and Austria and Germany, that's further away from Spain and Portugal. But the Moors going to Spain, Portugal, they going to France, they going to Sicily, they going to Crete, they going to Czechoslovakia, Austria, Germany. This is how you get names like Schwarzenegger, because the Moors are you see the presence of the Moors in the art, you see it in the architecture, you'll see it in the bloodline of Europeans. You'll see it in the foods that they're introducing into Europe, different types of fruits, figs, Valencia oranges. They're introducing something they call alchemy, which today we call chemistry. They're introducing the periodic tables, almanacs, all different types of things, different methods for surgery. They're introducing treaties on how to make, writings and books, pamphlets on how to make surgical instruments. They're introducing surgical procedures. They're introducing all this to Europe. Europe is in the Dark Ages, okay? And they're taking the light from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, into Europe, which was the Dark Continent. If you read Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, this breaks down all this history and a lot more. Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. It has a lot of essays in here from a lot of our historians, including Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay, who's one of the baddest scholars dealing with the history of the Moors. Okay, Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay. All right, so let's continue here. And you can also register for the online courses that I teach. We have them in a bundle pack, and we have them on demand. We have a sale going on for a couple more days. It's regularly $130. We have them slashed down to $40 for African American History Month, and it includes ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, where I go in depth into a lot of this information. I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation, and it's all on demand. You can watch all around the world, okay? It's a 10-course bundle pack. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, that's a 14-hour, 7-session online course where I go deep into a lot of this history. All right, and we'll post the information here. Let's see here, where is it? All right, so when we look at the book from when we look at the book about Dr. Carla G Woodson, right? And why Dr. Carla G Woodson created what started out as Negro History Week. He said that our people did not understand their history, okay? And this went for the children as well as the parents. They did not, and most of us still don't. Most of us don't even understand the history of slavery. And unfortunately, you got many of our people running around talking about the U.S. owes us $14 trillion. And unfortunately, I'm going to do a separate presentation dealing with reparations and this $14 trillion hoax. Because many of our people don't even understand how to make a legal argument for reparations. And this is why a lot of this hasn't gone the way we wanted over the past, 30 years. And you have a lot of people playing on the emotions of our people and lying to them about $14 trillion. Reparations is old, but it ain't gonna be $14 trillion. And understand and putting out a number like that means you don't really understand history. And they're not making a legal argument. They're making a moral argument. And you don't go to a legal court to make a moral argument, one. Two, you don't go to lawmakers with a moral argument. You go with a legal argument, because that has to pass the House of Representatives and it has to pass the U.S. Senate. Anybody telling you that the president can do an executive order to pay reparations is lying to you. And that violates Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. The purse strings are controlled by Congress, not the president. The president's annual budget that the president puts together has to be approved by Congress. So if somebody's telling you, because I remember during the 2016 election, I saw black people running around passing out flyers promoting Jill Stein, saying Jill Stein gonna get us reparations. And I said, how? They said, if Jill Stein wins, we're gonna have her do an executive order to pay reparations. I mean, hell, you don't understand Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, man. That's a violation of the U.S. Constitution. That's not gonna happen. So you have some people who mean well and are putting out this incorrect information. You have other people who just lying to our people and just conning them. Okay, and that's just that. I'm being honest. And see, unfortunately, not enough people are being honest with our people and telling them how to make a legal argument and telling them the truth. A lot of these people putting this information out, number one, don't understand law. Number two, don't understand history. So I'm going to do a separate presentation breaking this stuff down so we don't get fooled and conned by these people, okay? Because some of them mean well, okay? Others don't, all right? And they're just lying to our people. And I debate any of them. I'll debate any of them, okay? And if you heard the two-part interview I did with Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury, breaking down this history of reparations and understanding it from a legal perspective, you know what I'm talking about, okay? Because the people putting this nonsense out here, a lot of them, they're not dealing with that from a legal perspective. All right, let's continue here. I thought Dr. Claude Anderson went to the UN to file a suit against the U.S. for reparations. I'm not familiar with him going to the UN. Dr. Claude Anderson is one of my teachers. I just talked to him. I just interviewed him January 13th, 2019. All the interviews on YouTube, and it's archived at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com in audio podcast form. He's pushing for to enforce the Black Freedmen Indian treaties of 1866. And I'll tell you, go listen to interviews I've done with him talking about that. And he and his organization, the Harvest Institute, they've identified about 200,000 Black people who qualify for that. That's a whole nother conversation. That is one of the legal arguments. I'll do a separate presentation dealing with that. That's a legal argument. Okay, a lot of this other stuff is are not legal arguments. But he talked about how he went wrong with that in some of the interviews I've done with him. Our YouTube channel is Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. But you can go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and click on the YouTube banner there. And it takes you to our YouTube channel. Okay. Because I just interviewed him January 13th, 2019. I think we talked a little bit about the Black Freedmen Indian treaties also. Okay, so Dr. Carla G Woodson exclaimed that Blacks knew practically nothing about their history. He ultimately believed that African Americans could benefit immensely from knowledge of their past and the accomplishments of their ancestors. He added that race prejudice was the byproduct of whites' beliefs that Black people had not contributed anything of worth to world civilization. So white people buy into, and some African Americans buy into, the stereotypes that are projected of us in the media. And this is why many African Americans suffer from either low self-esteem and low racial esteem, or high self-esteem and low racial esteem. Low racial esteem meaning they think very lowly of their race as a group. So they may use negative stereotypical images, or they may use negative pejorative terms, calling the N-word, things like this. Think very negatively of their people as a group because they're ignorant of their history. And what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself when you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay, so one of the reasons why many of our people don't fight back is because many of our people do not think they are worth fighting for, because they're suffering from low self-esteem and or low racial esteem. Robin Walker, the great historian Robin Walker, has about 4-minute video on YouTube where he's talking about self-esteem versus racial esteem. Okay, check that video out. So Dr. Carla G Woodson added that race prejudice was the byproduct of whites' beliefs that black people had not contributed anything of worth to world civilization. He argued that if the historical record was set straight, and that if the history of black people was studied along with the achievements of others in schools, not only would black youth develop a sense of pride and self-worth, but racism would be abolished. So Dr. Carla G. Woodson felt and advocated that the history of African Americans needed to be taught in every school across this country, not just the schools that we attend, but every school across this country. Dr. Woodson concluded, quote, "Let truth destroy the dividing prejudice and prejudice of nationality and teach universal love without distinction of race, merit, or rank. With sublime enthusiasm and heavenly vision of the great teacher, let us help men rise above the race hate of their age unto the altruism of a rejuvenated universe," end quote. Okay, now Negro History Week was the first major achievement in popularizing Black history and was unique in that it focused on the Black youth. Okay, so this monthly cultural celebration focused on African American youth. And this period of time, when it started out as 1 week, Dr. Carla G. Woodson felt that this was the week that African American students showed what they had been learning year round. It was never designed to be the only time of the year we study our history. Many of us have it backwards. And number two, white people did not give us this monthly cultural celebration. They didn't give us the month of February, none of that. Okay, because a lot of people going back to low self-esteem and low racial esteem, a lot of our people denigrate and degrade and deride this monthly cultural celebration and say white people took our history and then gave us this 1 month to celebrate it. No, we created this. Okay, we didn't go ask permission. We created this. So oftentimes, even when we create something, because we have been so psychologically brain damaged, we just attack it. Okay, but these same people will go celebrate European holidays, Christmas, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, 4th of July. They'll go celebrate European holidays, no problem. So now Negro History Week was the first major achievement in popularizing Black history and was unique in that it focused on Black youth, okay? Dr. Woodson realized that the miseducation of Black people began in their homes. He realized that the miseducation of Black people began in their homes, communities, and elementary schools. Dr. Woodson's vision of Negro History Week was optimistic, strategic, and long-term. Optimistic, strategic, and long-term. He wanted this modest week-long celebration to serve as a stepping stone toward the gradual introduction of Black history into the curricula of all levels of the U.S. educational system, okay? Kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school, college level. He's looked at as the father of Black history and the father of Black History Month. He's credited with laying a foundation for Black studies programs in colleges, okay? Now, he hoped that the Negro History Week would evolve into Negro History Year, okay? He hoped that Negro History Week would evolve into Negro History Year, as he affirmed from time to time. Dr. Woodson consistently instructed those observing the week that they needed to diligently prepare for the celebration months in advance, and that after mid-February, they needed to continue acknowledging the role of African descendants in world history, not just 1619 up until now, not just American history, okay? Continue acknowledging the role of African descendants in world history. This is what we don't understand about African American History Month. We just focus on 1619 up until now. We'll focus on slavery and runaway slaves and things like this. All right, and African American inventors and the first Negro to do this and the first Negro to do that. but we're not putting this into a world perspective, which ties into Pan-Africanism and understanding how the fate of African people all around the world is interconnected and intertwined. And we need to look at African people around the world as one people, even though they'll speak different languages, have different cultures, we'll see different common themes in the cultures, especially as we were spread throughout the diaspora. So African American History Month is much bigger than what we think it is. It was created to be much bigger, to be more powerful than the way many of us celebrate it. But most of us have not studied the history of it. So it's like using a $2,000 flat screen TV and you haven't read the instruction manual. This is what's taking place. Professor Kabahai Kamene, formerly known as Booker T. Coleman, you see him in the Hidden Colors documentaries. We're in the Black Friday documentaries together. We're in Elementary Genocide Part 3 from director Raheem Shabazz together in Black Fridays from director Rick Mathis. Professor Kaba talks about how to understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. To understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. So we need to plan African American History Month events months in advance. We need to understand the annual theme and center our celebrations around that theme, because the annual theme gives purpose and relevancy to the celebration, and it connects the history to the present. And it's all this monthly cultural celebration is also designed for us to look toward the future as well, plan for the future. So this is bigger than just coming together for an event for 2 or 3 hours talking about dead people. Our whole understanding of this monthly cultural celebration is totally backwards. So those just tuning in, I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. Follow our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Follow us on YouTube, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And right on the homepage, we have this presentation, Breaking the Chains. It's a 3-hour presentation I've done. I did in 2018, February 3rd, 2018 for African American History Month, Breaking the Chains, Why We Celebrate Black History Month. It's a 3-hour presentation that goes deep into this history and deals with dispelling myths about our history also. If you like this type of information, you can register for the online courses that I teach. They're all on demand. We have them in a 10-course bundle pack. It's regularly $130, on sale $40. It includes a 14-hour, 7-session online course that I've done called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. That's on sale for a couple more days, $40, regularly $130, all on demand. Watch around the world. And it also includes Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, and some other presentations also, okay? African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com will let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. We take your 30-second and 60-second commercial, put it into the audio podcast of our broadcast, and our Sunday night show, the African History Network show. And we're on 7 different podcast platforms, okay? So the book that I'm sharing some information with you from is called Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C. This is one of the best books dealing with Dr. Carla G Woodson. Okay, there's not a lot of books dealing with Dr. Carla G Woodson either. The Father of Black History, Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C., The Father of Black History. This is by Dr. Pero Dagbovi, Ph.D. And I got this February 2015. He's a member of ASALA, Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which is the organization that Dr. Carla G Woodson co-founded. And ASALA was having a African American History Month event at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And Dr. Dagbovi, he was there speaking. He was doing a lecture speaking about Dr. Carla G Woodson and about his book. So I bought this book there at that event. Okay, so Dr. Carla G Woodson said that they needed to continue acknowledging the role of African descendants in world history after Negro History Week ended, after the second week in February. He said, quote, Negro History Week should be a demonstration of what has been done in the study of the Negro during the year, and at the same time as a demonstration of greater things to be accomplished, end quote. Dr. Woodson instructed school teachers. This is what he instructed school teachers. So he felt that this week out of the year, the students should be showing what they have been studying year round. He said it didn't make sense just to teach our history 1 week out of the year and they study white history the rest of the year. He said, quote, a subject which receives attention 1 week out of the 36 will not mean much to anyone, end quote. According to Dr. Carla G Woodson, soon after he mailed out his first Negro History Week circulars to various educational institutions, presses, fraternal and social welfare organizations, literary societies, and radio stations, quote, there was a stir in the direction of active participation. There was a stir in the direction of active participation, end quote. He boasted, quote, there were few places in the country where the celebration did not make some impression. Okay, end quote. Now, Woodson offered those who decided to participate in Negro History Week celebrations, promotional materials and resources. Okay, he offered those who decided to participate in Negro History Week celebrations promotional materials and resources. He also gave many suggestions in pamphlets and articles in the Negro History Bulletin, okay, as well as in editorials in numerous Black newspapers. He routinely instructed participants to organize committees for the celebration months before Negro History Week. He routinely instructed participants to organize committees for the celebration months before Negro History Week. So this is planning. This is planning, okay? He outlined the critical steps to success involving the governing, power-wielding Board of Education, advertising the events extensively, recording oral testimonies from elders within the community, persuading libraries to order Black history books, setting aside 1 day of every week was a Book and Picture Fund Day, F-U-N-D, Book and Picture Fund Day, to raise money to purchase Black history books for the community, sending any relevant historical documents to the association so that they could be properly maintained, organizing Black history clubs, and creating a pageant highlighting the struggles of Black Americans. He always offered special suggestions to school teachers about maximizing the involvement of the youth in practical ways, especially in February volumes of the Bulletin, okay? The Negro History Bulletin. So this brother was far ahead of his time. This brother is detailing the preparation involved in organizing events for 1 week. We ain't talking about Black History Month. That starts officially nationwide in 1976. We're talking about for 1 week. This type of preparation. This brother is very much misunderstood. Very underrated. Okay? So now, if you go to asalh.org, asalh.org, if you go to asalh.org, okay, they have this year's theme, but they have resources and suggestions and tools that teachers can use in the classroom and people can use for homeschooling their children. All right, so we should use asalh.org as a resource. Okay, asalh.org. We should use it as a resource. When you go there and you look at the themes, and they have the themes going back to 1928, you realize we've largely been disrespecting Dr. Carla G Woodson's legacy. Okay, how you have a Black History Month celebration and don't even mention Dr. Carla G Woodson, don't talk about it. And a lot of the ways we've been celebrating is totally wrong, totally backwards. We never read the instruction manual. Okay, we haven't done the research. All right, so This year's theme is Black migrations, but it's not just a theme to deal with for the month of February, it's to take all throughout the year. And as we commemorate August 20th, 1619, Jamestown, Virginia, we have to understand, one, African people, we've been here for tens of thousands of years. And this is what Dr. David Imhotep, and I've interviewed him about 11 or 13 times. He's a friend of mine. This is not him. This is the cover of the book. Okay. This is a brother from South America. That's not Dr. David Imhotep. Okay. Google his name, you'll see a picture of him. But so now, August 20, 1619 did happen, but we were here for tens of thousands of years before that, number one. This was our land stolen from us. But number two, the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in the, going back to the 1520s, specifically 1526. This is about 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia. So they don't even talk about that. Okay. And then he talks about how on page, was it 67? He talks about how he talks about Captain John Smith of Jamestown, Virginia. He talks about how Captain John Smith was captured by a group of Black Indians. Okay. So this is not talked about. Page 65, John Smith and Black Indians. In 1607, the Englishman, Captain John Smith, built the first permanent Caucasian settlement in North America in Jamestown, Virginia. While building the settlement, Captain John Smith made contact with the Powhatan tribe, Powhatan, the Powhatan tribe. The Powhatans were part of the Algonquin speakers, who were the larger group of Indians in Virginia as late as the time Captain John Smith arrived. There were more than 10,000 Algonquin in Virginia alone before the colonists arrived. Europeans called the Delaware Indians Redskins because of their reddish natural complexion and the vermilion makeup they were fond of and decorated their bodies. Therefore, they were unfortunately called Redskins and sometimes called Red Devils by the European settlers, also referring to their skin tone. Now, in 1607, Captain John Smith described the chief of the Powhatans, writing, quote, Powhatan more like a devil than a man, with some 200 more as black as himself. Okay. When Smith described the chief indirectly saying his braves were as black as he was, it is logical to assume that he too was black. When Smith described the Powhatans as devils and black, he was referring to skin tone. Dr. Clyde Winters agrees, saying, quote, early Americans would certainly be able to tell the difference between paint and complexion, end quote. In any case, whether the Powhatans were black at that late date or not, does not change the fact that the first Americans were Africans. These first Americans remained black complexion until 3000 BC, when the first Asians entered and began to mix blood with the Proto-American Africans. They're the offspring of the intermixing of these Africans who were here for tens of thousands of years, and Asians coming here, they're offspring of who we call Native Americans. Because when you look at old black and white photographs, these were usually a dark-skinned people, Native Americans. They weren't the very light-skinned, almost white-looking Native Americans you see today. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Kenyatta said, name the book you are reading. You talking about the one from Dr. Carla G Woodson? Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C. Carla G Woodson in Washington, D.C. The father of Black history, okay? And the other one is The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep. The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep. All right. So, African American business owners, hey, if you want to advertise with the African History Network, email us at customer service at africanhistorynetwork.com, customer service at africanhistorynetwork.com. Then also, if you like this type of information, you could donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or go to our website, africanhistorynetwork.com, click on the yellow donate button. If you don't have a PayPal account, this helps us to stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay the bills, etc., so that the sales of the DVDs as well as the online courses, okay? All right. All right, so look, hey, be sure to listen to the African History Network every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. And we'll be on again this Sunday as well. And we broadcast here on Facebook Live also. We have the information at our website, africanhistorynetwork.com. All right, so hopefully you learned something. We have to do more research in African American History Month. And it was changed to African American History Month a few years ago by the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which is the governing organization of African American History Month. Once again, it's the organization that Dr. Carla G Woodson co-founded September 9th, 1915. All right, so hopefully this helped you all. Share this broadcast as well. Follow us on Facebook, the African History Network. Be sure to turn on the notification so you're notified when we go live. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Subscribe there, turn on the notification also. And remember, people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. People's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. We also have a Black Panther bundle pack as well. We know the film Black Panther came out in February 2018. So we know this is a 1-year anniversary of the film coming out. It just won at the Oscars, first superhero movie to win Oscars. We saw Ruth Carter won for costume design. That sister's been in the game for about 36 years. She was the costume designer for not just Black Panther, but also the film Malcolm X as well, and a number of other movies also. And Hannah Belcher, we saw one for set design as well. So I have a number of lectures dealing with the film Black Panther. We actually have a bundle pack because the film is very deep on multiple levels. It connects us to African history, African culture, African languages, things like this, African spiritual systems, and I deal with some of the history of the Black Panther comic book also. Okay, so we have a 6 DVD bundle pack, the Black Panther bundle pack, and we have a bundle where you get the Black Panther bundle pack, and you also get enrolled in the 10-course online bundle pack as well. The online courses including Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So that is that's on sale, $80. Okay, we'll post the information here, and we have it on the homepage of our website, africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com. Okay. All right, so look, hey, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay. Remember, right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.